Yeah.
Yep. Poetic.
Yes, very nice.
Me ouvindo?
Okay.
Yes.
Estamos te ouvindo.
Perfeito.
Agora eu tô...
Paula,
Hello, good morning, bom dia.
Bom dia, obrigado, Paula, novamente. O Nelson vai introduzir você, a turma dos holandeses e brasileiros, e depois a gente começa tudo em inglês. Se você tiver alguma tela para compartilhar, depois a gente compartilha, certo? Obrigado novamente.
eu tenho.
Nelson?
Eu que agradeço. Espero poder colaborar.
Bom dia, Paula. Eu começo em português, porque eu sou português, mas estou na Holanda, mas vou já passar para inglês para os nossos alunos também poderem, enfim, perceber. So, good morning for you, Paula. Good afternoon here in the Netherlands. Thanks a lot for agreeing in giving this lecture to this group. So we are actually very excited with this collaboration with São Paulo. I mean, with Leandro, Luis, Marcos, and Mariana, we have in different moments collaborated in different projects. But this time we decided to have a collaborative educational program, which is a design studio from our side, and a course, a theory course from the São Paulo side. But we have students working together, students from São Paulo and from the TU Delft working together. And actually from the TU Delft group, so you can probably see already from the list of participants in this chat that the students come from, literally all over the world. So we have, the other day I did this count. I think we have almost 10 different countries and many different continents represented in this cohort. And the initial idea was actually to, at this point, to be in São Paulo doing some field work and meeting you live. Unfortunately, as you know, this is not possible. So, but in any case, and thanks to the help of Leandro, Luis, Marcos, and Mariana, they put together a fantastic program with these lectures and this collaboration. So we are very happy with the way that things are going. We started already 2 weeks ago, and yours is going to be the first lecture. So we are very much looking forward to your lecture. And and I think from what let's say we know from your work, that it's going to be actually the timing is perfect, because you will share with us your research and your knowledge about São Paulo regarding the social function of property and other urban instruments that have been implemented, and that to a certain extent influence, say, what we would call the architecture of housing or the issue of housing, right? Because that's that's maybe as a final remark from my side, is that our focus is indeed in what we call, let's say, global housing. So understanding how housing these days has been, influenced by, processes that are related with, of course, environment, economy, and different societal changes all over the planet. We have been working before in places as Ethiopia, Ghana, Bangladesh, India, and this is the first time that we are exposed to these issues in South America. So we are very much looking forward to learn more from you.
I just want to say a word because I'm part of the team together with Nelson and Harold. My name is Vanessa Grossman. I'm Brazilian, and for me it's an honor to have you here. I just joined the TU Delft as an assistant professor. I'm familiar with your work, so I'm very glad that you accepted our invitation, and we couldn't find someone more to the point, let's say, to introduce the topic of our course. So thank you so much for having accepted it.
Yes, indeed. Sorry, because I forgot then to introduce our side of the operation. Let's say And together with me, indeed, we have Vanessa, who obviously was instrumental in gearing also our interest back to Brazil. Vanessa joined us since this academic year. And Harold,
I would just like to say that FAU is my alma mater. And Harold has been working with global housing with Nelson for a long time. So maybe he wants to say something.
No, just, well, I'm Harold. Hello. I'm honored to be here. Looking forward to the lecture. I have no connection so far to Brazil, but I hope to establish one through these courses of which this is the first one. So I'm really looking forward.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nelson, Vanessa, and Harold. So from our side, just very briefly introducing, we have Leandro Medrano and Luis Recaman. Maybe you can wave very briefly for those who are not from, who don't know you yet. And we have Mariana, who's also sitting there, and myself. So from our side, good morning and good afternoon for those who are in Dutch time. We do have our first class from the course Into the Void today. So I'd like to give a few brief instructions before we start, as we have to. So we will be recording this class for educational purposes only. Should anyone have a problem with this, please turn off your camera. Or if you don't agree at all, you must leave the room. Please keep your microphones turned off. During the lecture, we encouraged you to write your thoughts or questions that you might have on the chat so we can organize and not miss any of those thoughts for the discussions we'll have at the very end. At the end of the lecture, we will open for questions and we will organize it at the time. So we are very honored, Paula, to have you with us today. It's indeed very important and relevant for this course and for the topics being discussed, that we can count with your contribution and to listen about your work and what you've been developing at the University of São Paulo as our colleague. I'm going to introduce Paula very briefly. So Nelson already said we're going to be tackling and discussing the issue of social function of property on side of urban instruments in São Paulo. Our goal is, in doing this, is to critically relate to the notion of the void, which is the topic of this studio and theoretical course. In doing so, we aim to debate the impact and the limitations of those instruments in shaping the architectural and urban design, as well as the experience of space. So Santoro is a professor in urban planning at the Faculty of Urbanism of the University of São Paulo. There she coordinates the research group LabCidade. She was a visiting researcher at the New York University in 2019, also at the City University of New York in 2017. Paula holds a PhD in Habitat from FAUUSP, the same faculty where she is now a professor, from 2012, and she has also been a PhD fellow at the Barcelona School of Architecture from the Polytechnical University of Catalonia, this in 2010, as well as a PhD fellow at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy in 2011, where she earlier attended a specialization in land policy and Latin America in Panama 2007. Before that, she was a technical assistant at the Public Ministry of São Paulo State, a researcher at the Instituto Pólis, at the Environment Institute, ESA, and a professor at Escola da Cidade. In 2009, she worked in a Brazilian government cooperation with Moçambique for the preparation of the national housing policy. So, without further ado, Paula, now I would like to give the word to you, if you please.
Good morning, good afternoon, good night for those who are far from here. And I'm Paula Santoro. Thank you for this kindly introduction. I'm very honored and worried about to start these lectures into a partnership that for us is very important for FAO and also for architectural and urbanism knowledge, to mix people, to mix university, to mix knowledge. So I hope I don't disappoint you. And I start saying that English is not my matter language. So please ask me if you don't understand. And I learned with the feminists that we shouldn't apologize for that. We should have to be proud of it, that I'm a Brazilian and I speak Portuguese. So please don't feel ashamed if you want to, if you don't understand something. That's why I put a lot of tests on my slides to make sure you understand some terms or some expressions. And then after I can join you and for the questions, and also we can share, I can let you the presentation. So please don't keep writing a lot. And the other thing that I would like to ask you is to turn off the camera. I know every professor says and stays happy of seeing your faces, but my internet here is terrible. So I will prefer you to see me, and then when we open to the questions, we put it on again. And I would like to thank you, especially Leandro Medrano and Luis Recaman, that are from FAU, our connection. And thank you for this invitation. Thank you, Nelson, Vanessa, and Harold. And especially Marcos Rosa that was in touch with me. Let's start. I will share a screen with you, and I will share my PowerPoint. And I hope you can see me. Can you see me here?
We can see you, Paula. Yes,
yes.
The lecture, and you are in front of it. Looks wonderful.
Yes.
Good.
It's nice.
Very nice.
That's strange, but I think a little funny in the morning here. It's good. I will talk about inclusionary housing policies that use urban instruments for affordable housing production in São Paulo city. And this is part of a broader investigation that I coordinate with Raquel Ronick at LabCidade FAUUSP. We have a lab that's called LabCidade, City Lab in English. That's about right to the city and public space lab. It's based on São Paulo metropolis, the biggest city of Brazil that has about 20 million inhabitants. We focus on investigations about right to the city and housing issues. And one main research project that we have is what we call Observatory on Forced Displacement and Evictions. And this is more or less what we are working with. So you can see these bullets, these points, red ones, are or evicted, or these black and white are threatened households in between 2 years in São Paulo in central area. So these are our numbers that we try to map, and I'll bring some of this investigation today. And if you want to see more, we have a website that's here. Unfortunately, only in Portuguese and Spanish. Some things are in English, but you have to find it. But I invite you to know some of our work. Our projects also aim to monitor and analyze the local urban policy in São Paulo, focusing on impact of adoption of many kinds of public-private partnerships. And so we look for and we monitor urban instruments, and I will bring some of our investigation here too. I organized the class in three main axes, three main ideas that I will present in this introduction. The first one, I will try to frame central area. I know that you are working on central area, trying to show you that São Paulo central area is not an empty place. it has different ways of living and different needs that we should look when we design an urban policies. And also its dynamics are changing a lot. We used to have a vacant place and vacant buildings, and these vacant households are decreasing, while at the same time, real estate launches are increasing. So we have real estate market very strongly increasing the production of new units around the border of the central area. So I'll try to show you some data about that to work with the idea of the void. The second axis is about inclusionary housing policies. The idea is to show you that housing supply focused agenda to produce affordable housing. That's a very well-known term, international term, to produce new market-oriented housing units, stimulate real estate market, sell housing units, but didn't dialogue very well with the real needs of the population. Dialogue more with market logics. And these social needs, so sometimes they mobilize the needs to justify affordable housing policies and mobilize also urban regulations. So that's why you invited me to talk a little about these and PEUC. I will explain what are these instruments, and they are important to construct these policies. And the third axis, an idea, I will show you a housing PPP that is ongoing at São Paulo. And the idea is to produce, it was launched on 2014, to produce 14,000 housing units at the center of the city and manage the buildings that they built for 20 years. And so the idea is to provide with affordable housing, but really we are monitoring it, and there are a lot of demolitions and changes on urban fabric to threats and evictions of some of people that live at the central area. And I would try to show you that it also mobilized a lot of public resources, including land, rights to build, and financial resources around that. So the excuse to do a partnership with private and public sides, and that happens and mobilize it a lot of resources. It was not to have less public resources. So these are the three main axes, and I can end my class now. No, let's go on. And I'm hearing the chat, but I can't see it. So if you please want to talk with me, please put sound on. So to start, São Paulo is not an empty place. I think you know São Paulo is the biggest metropolitan region. We have 20 million inhabitants in a huge area. So to locate central area, it's important to understand it's the central area of the biggest metropolis. And this is our 39 cities, municipalities that we have around São Paulo. And can you see my mouse? I don't know.
Not right now. Can you please
can you move it? Yeah.
I am moving it, so you're not seeing. But the central city, the central municipality is São Paulo, and our central area is between rivers. I can't annotate here. I only can show the PowerPoint. Okay. And this central area is inside a city that has a fast population growth on the 70s, and now and after 90s it started to grow less. It's growing, but it's growing less, and it's growing on population in different areas. Central districts have negative growth. That's this map on our left side. Central districts have negative growth, or states are losing. We're losing on 19 these districts. We're losing population, while the peripheral areas are growing and growing fast. So we are growing less in the metropolitan region, but we are losing population at the central area, and with lots of new population at the peripheral area. That's important because it constructed an idea that the central area were becoming vacant, there were no people living, and that's not true. It's very dense. But what happens is that the population of the central area is vulnerable, and its density occupied, also mixing housing and offices. I think you have already noticed that by your projects, but that's important to my narrative. So, and also, if you see the center of this metropolis, it concentrates the highest income family rent. This is a map showing that. So the central area are the highest ones. This concentrates also jobs. So this central area concentrates jobs, rent, and also has the land prices are highest. So we have what we call unequal and exclusionary way of occupying the city, where we have a central area that offers jobs, a better place to live, better infrastructure, offer also the highest land prices, so it's not open to everyone. That's why we call exclusionary area. And this is the main narrative. Of course, it has many camadas. How can I say that in English?
Layers.
Many layers, but okay. And we also have at the central area a very important commuting time zone. So a lot of people came from peripheral areas and passed through central area to go to other places and to go to south, the south offered of jobs at São Paulo. And so it has a lot of buses and metro lines and train lines and also jams, traffic jams. So at the same time, we have a peripheral area with a lot of self-construction and precarious ways of living and lacks of infrastructure. And also, if we see race distribution, this is our census, we ask if the people who live at the household is a white, brown, mixed, Black or Asian or indigenous person, and they declare who they are, who they feel like they are. And as you can notice by the map, we have a white place where we have jobs and better offer of infrastructure. But if we look deep in the central area, we concentrate brown and mixed and also Black people at this, what we call popular territory. So the central area is a popular territory that at the same time is in the middle of this job offer and good urban conditions. And the central area started with an historical central area. I'm between two history professor here, so I won't go deeper on that, but we have an historical central area, but also what I will call here central districts is more than that. The central area is here at Sé, what we call a district is called Sé, but what I will call central districts is an an amplified area where we have Barra Funda, Bom Retiro, Santa Cecilia, and the drawing is bigger than only the central area. So we have districts around San Republic, and that's important because I will show some data about that. What if we see these central districts at São Paulo, and we look for a historical special periodization, some historical periods. From 50s to 80s, we were growing, but from population, we have population growth until 80s, as you can see from this data, and then it starts to change, and we have a popular evasion. We are losing population on these central districts between 80s and 20 and 2000, and some policies try to overcome these processes. That's why this narrative around a vacant land and a population that became popular and with less highest income family houses present, so that this huge narrative. And also we begin to construct a narrative of the stigmas that I call, as if this central area was a dangerous place to live, a place where homeless occupied, and so we try to make it invisible and to change that through policies, through urban policies. And in 2000, it changes. So what I'm trying to show you is that after 2000, we have another demographic change, and we start to grow again, to growth population. So this, if you can see between 2000 and 2010, every central district is started to grow population. So this happened, and we have some maps that show the demographic growth by weighted areas. And if you compare São Paulo and central area, this graphic that you can see, the central area growth more in population than the whole city, the whole São Paulo city. So it changed from the map that is at left, where we have a blank and negative growth, to a central area that have a positive growth, although it is not a huge growth. And how do we explain that? We explain by one main idea that I'll try to bring here is that at the same time, vacant households decrease and real estate launches increase. So if you see these triangles, these black triangles around the central area, that are launches from real estate, commercial ones and residential ones. The triangles are the residential ones. So as you can see, through the 2000 and 2013, we started to build new housing apartments in this area, and this process also attracted population. And if we measure vacant households in the central districts, I'm on it exactly, but as you can see, from 2000 and 2010, the vacant households diminished. It decreased a lot in almost every district. Moca was one exception, only Moca. But the other ones, and Bela Vista, Belém, and Bom Retiro, they start to decrease. So we are, in a process of occupying this place with new housing units. At the same time, we are constructing this stigma that I brought from a student that is finishing the undergraduation, Laura Dalmeida. She mapped how media treated the central area and housing squats buildings at the central area. And she pointed that the three words that she could find more is tragedy, crime, and risk. So this stigma is that central area is a place of tragedy, and it has everything to do with a big tragedy, that it was an occupied building that fall down in a fire. It's our World Trade Center here at Central Area at São Paulo. And crime, because how these many different ways of living were informal, sometimes considered illegal, sometimes criminal for the media. But if we look for, it's an opportunity, unfortunately, for those who cannot afford the new housing units that are launched for the market. So we have, at the same time, a narrative that it's a dangerous place. And also we have a narrative that is a risky place to live in, for instance, in squatted building or tenements or pension that could go on fire and fall down. So this population that still lives there, Black and mixed people, but also immigrants from many places of the world that live at this central area, and migrants from many states of Brazil. They live on these popular territories, but they are frequently threatened and evicted. And so I will show you some eviction maps. As you can see, Campos Elíseos and Centro are this, they concentrate eminent domain cases that evicted people from for instance, not paying rent or could not afford the rent. And if we see the rent areas, the eviction from rent, we see the central area, Brás, Centro, Santa Cecília, as this area that concentrate many cases of São Paulo. We put it, if you want to see more, at this book, Cartografia dos Territórios Populares. So what I'm trying to say is that also the central area is changing demographically. Real estate is producing new units, but at the same time, who lives there in different ways of living, like tenements, squatted buildings, boarding houses, and they are constantly being threatened and evicted to give place to another city, a renewal project. So this is the first part that I want to frame central area. And now I'll go to the second part. I'll talk a little bit about what I call inclusionary housing policies, what internationally is known by that. And these policies, they are important for us to understand how urban regulation and public assets are mobilized to make the changes on this territory. So for you to understand, I don't know from where you come from, so I think you all, in all of your countries, you have affordable housing agenda, and these were a very strong agenda to construct affordable housing, not only disseminated through Europe or North American, but also it was very disseminated thinking about Latin American countries, and the excuse was to understand that Latin America has to provide affordable housing for low-income families producing mixed territories. We have this history that periphery was aparted from central areas. So let's do it mixed. This agenda was very much focused on that. But also we have a challenge that how to produce face the challenges, to face the challenge to produce it through the state with no money, without resources, or without the necessary resource to build a lot. So the Latin American challenge is that we need to do a lot of housing units, not only residual ones. So we also imported this idea, and we imported it from UN Habitat manuals, agenda, the right to the city and right to housing agenda that put these urban instruments into the urban policy agenda to produce what we call inclusionary housing policies. What are these policies? These are urban policies that use tools, urban planning tools, to create affordable housing by capturing surplus value or high land prices. We capture these prices, these valuation prices, and generate with this capture money to stimulate real estate market dynamics. So we stimulate urban renewal, urban developments, and we try to produce affordable housing into these urban developments with the money obtained through selling rights to build to these new developments, or even with subsidies to the market to produce affordable housing in many models of public-private partnerships. These agenda were very important, and in Brazil especially, and also in Colombia. I think these two Latin American cities are important because at 90s and 2000s, they approved two main urban regulations to promote, that has urban instruments to promote the construction of affordable housing in this agenda, capturing land surplus value and producing inclusionary housing policies through the market, with the market dynamics. The main critics of that, and I will show it in Latin American contexts, is that sometimes this justification to build affordable housing obfuscate complex real estate operations and serves to legitimize them. So we use these needs to legitimize affordable housing agenda, but we construct after or never deliver the housing, or we have some troubles considering the quantity, so we evict a lot of people and we construct less units for replace them at the place. We choose a single model to produce one kind of housing, new building apartments, and we don't look for retrofit or how to make changes in squat buildings, tenements, pensions, inns, board house, and all of these different kinds and complexity of housing needs that we have also here. So we also import these ideas, and these ideas didn't fit for us. And okay, we imported the concept because the housing deficit is very high and very diverse. We have here in Brazil a lot of millions of families, 5 million of families that need to have better housing conditions, but not only housing conditions. We don't need 5 million new units, but we need to control prices, land prices, to control density of occupation, to put infrastructure like water or sewage, and make it a better place. So we have a very diverse deficit. And here I put a mix of that. So we have squat buildings, we have peripheral areas, we have, and this concept of producing new affordable housing cannot attend to these diverse and complex frameworks of housing needs, while simultaneously privilege the real estate market profits-driven logic. And how demand also is defined into affordable housing policies is very critic for us. The average income is not a good index, and we have this critic also. I study in New York, and I have the same critic about this, the measure of the rent family income as a measure to produce housing for these incomes. And they calculate the policies by calculating the average income, determining what families are able to pay, what are not, and don't measure if the family has condition to pay during the time. And we have here, and at pandemia, at COVID pandemia, it grew more of a condition of work that is unpaid, that is very, very precarious, and doesn't have regular payments. So mainly these people who live at popular territories in Brazil, they cannot prove they can pay because they earn very different salaries, rents during the month, during the year, and sometimes they don't have rent. So, and this agenda, it's hard to be good for them. And also we are seeing involuntary displacements because they cannot pay. They can sometimes they reach the new units and they go there to live, and they cannot pay taxes, they cannot pay the rent, they cannot pay for the mortgage. So this is also an agenda that emphasizes land for mixed income developments. What happens is that to make some units for the poor more subsidized, we produce a lot of mixed and for the medium range families units. And so we use a lot of public resource and lands to produce more for profit developments than for these families' needs. So what happens is that we have an unbalanced result. So we transform a lot the urban fabric to produce a residual number of housing for those who need. So, and at the end of the day, this mixed use drive up land prices. So at the end of the day, we are revaluing and putting value on land on this project. This agenda is also very critic about public resources it's mobilizing, like land, regulatory instruments, rights to build, the subsidies, and to one single model to produce new housing units with private ownership, constructing really enterprises for building and selling. But now this agenda is changing. We are discussing a lot, and then we can also discuss about how rent is coming into a new financial model. And Brazil and Colombia had huge, but also Mexico, also Chile, had huge new housing production programs based on this idea, based on this agenda, this unique agenda. That's the problem is not the agenda, but they are the only and the main, and they concentrate resources, land, rights to build, and financial resources to this agenda, and not looking, they don't look for the diversity of ways of living and precariousness that we have in the city. And these policies, how are they managed? So we saw they constructing the idea of affordable housing, they measuring rents, family rents, to who will be designed for each place of, this is New York, this is also São Paulo. But they also have urban instruments. One of them, very important, and important for you that are working on a project, is what we call land reserves for the production of affordable housing. But that's a zoning area where we say we have to produce more affordable housing here than other kinds of production, like mixed middle-class housing, high cooperative towers, and we have to do more affordable housing than the others. And also we have a lot of percentile of land or percentile of building area, of floor ratio, focusing on affordable housing. So we have instruments that regulate that. We also have it. And we have a kind of rezonings, in rezonings process or urban development projects, we also can have a percentile of new units produced that has to be affordable housing, or also land, also a percentage of rights to build, also a percentage of the money that is obtained by surplus value captured to finance this urban development. So we have many urban instruments. I will talk about one of them. So if we see São Paulo, we have one important one is the zoning that we call special social interest zones. In Portuguese, we say ZEIs. So if you hear it, ZEIs, Zonas Especiais de Interesse Social. But we have also urban operations, solidarity, quota, percentages of resources. Oh, it's in Spanish. I'm sorry, I'm seeing it, parts of that in Spanish. Resources from urban developments, capture funds. We have housing PPP. So we have many kinds of instruments. And here, I won't talk about Bogota, but if you want, you can go and look for that. They also have the same agenda. And I will talk about ZEIs because at the central area, it was an important project to make a zoning that says that we will in the new urban developments, we will have to produce more than 50% of the area of affordable housing. And that's the main objective of this special social interest zone, ZEIs. And here I put, there are two translations in the literature. I will talk about special social interest zones, but you can also find other ways of writing. And this idea of transforming exclusionary zoning into inclusionary zoning was very disseminated in 80s in Brazil. as a recognition of irregular settlements struggle for their urban integration in a way that transformed public action on these spaces, creating new way to intervene in order to qualify these urban settlements and improve city and also guarantee housing rights. So avoid evictions, avoid threats. And this was the main idea of ZEIS. But it also, so here are some ZEIS images that are not from the central area of São Paulo, but just for you to have an idea. And so the idea was to recognize these informal settlements. But also at 80s, we started to think about special social interest zones as the opposite that the zoning used to be. So we tried to choose the same instrument and put market over subused, empty, vacant area to overcome social territorial exclusion models through urban regulation. The hypothesis was that intervene in urban regulations could produce the opposite effect of zoning that zoning historically promoted: exclusion, segregation, gentrification. So we would reserve some land and say here it's to produce affordable housing. This was very important at São Paulo, and here we are seeing some housing projects into these areas that should be empty, but truly they were not. That's one fake news, people. They were used, the São Paulo master plan read it as a vacant zone that should be a special interest zone, but they were not. They were demolishing and constructing new units, as you can see here. And that's hard to make it critical because the houses are good. The project is good. As you can see, it has a very qualified architecture, and so why not? I mean, so I'm bringing you a critique that goes to the polis, to the idea of the polis. It's important to have good, new affordable housing units and projects, but do we have to threaten and evict the people and only relocate part of them, and only after 20 years that they were evicted, so they keep in the situation that they changing places, waiting for the housing units? So we have to change the model, the policy model. That's what I'm trying to construct here. But they are very good, and I think that you will discuss that. And they are not in São Paulo. Here are special social interest zones in Diadema, where they made a collective construction. Como eu chamo mutirão? Brazilians, help.
Self-help?
Self-constructed units in a very autonomous and politically way of constructing, and with social movements. So it was very important also for social movements. And if I am constructing the narrative that these areas were for market, they were not only for market. So that's one thing important for those who study urban instruments. They are not only for market driven and profits logics, but they were also important for social movements. They fighted to have these zones into São Paulo master plans, and they are doing their self-constructed projects on these zones. So we expected that these zones at central area should be constructed with the social movements or with who lived in this area, trying to put them in the project and during the conception and all of it. Well, this instrument was very famous in Brazil and spread a lot of the country. So you can see on the blue the blue of the map areas, there are cities that said that they have these zones mainly to recognize informal settlements. We have 4, 5, 10, we can count our hands, the experience of using over vacant land. And São Paulo is one of these that uses over vacant land. So you've seen Brazilian experience of these instruments. We saw, and I'm here using a work that I made with Raquel Ronick. So we saw that these instruments were used to expand the offer of land for the production of social housing. I'm calling social housing the affordable housing for lower income here. And sometimes in some municipality, they double the land offered. So they put the prices down at first, and then the market understood that, and the land prices started to be highest again. So it's not a price control instrument. Please take care with it. And they were used to recognize right to housing and avoid forced evictions, often violent, or even it was important to instruct lawsuits that have come to require construction of social housing in areas that were occupied, so they have to be evicted to these new housing units, and the lawsuits could stop the eviction processes because they were on ZEIS, they were on special social interest zones. We find also government is important to implement the instrument, bringing landowners and social movements together and trying to make a combined project to make land possible for those who want to build their self-constructed projects. These instruments was also important to scale house production. When we have this huge program, Minha Casa, Minha Vida, My House, My Life, it's our huge federal program to produce housing. They produce it over ZEIS in many, many municipalities. And at São Paulo, especially, the new housing production were out of ZEIS. And after this huge program, they started to be everywhere, including ZEIS. But we also saw some projects that do what we call more of the same. They reproduce bad example using these regulatory instruments to downsize everything. So we make a house that's smaller than we consider in urban law good, or we put less infrastructure and we can regularize that, or so we reproduce sometimes precariousness in these special areas. That's the Brazilian scenery, and São Paulo was the first master plan that has this zoning law. And at 2002, we put it at our map. So as you can see in the map here, the red ones are regularization or occupied special social interest zones. And the green ones are the central area. As you can see, there was a plan of transforming this territory to produce new housing, and with 80% of the territory zoned with the zoning. And this changed in the master plan of 2014 to a broader urban and housing policies that involved a housing city plan, special social interest zones, but also a guarantee of 30% of resources that came from our urban development fund. That's important to buy land on these special social interest zones, or what I mean by that is that they designed a policy. The idea was to buy this vacant land or underused land to produce new urban developments, new urban housing policies, producing new units with My House, My Life program. So the idea was to change, to demolish, to change the urban fabric and to substitute that, and to also to look for the underused properties. And there were many instruments that I won't tell you here, but at the central area, if we see, the special social interest zones are these yellow ones. So they are everywhere at the central area, but they are out of the historical center. That's a very, we have a preservation law that makes difficult to intervene in this area to produce new units. But we have these white points were the notified underused properties that we, São Paulo City, notified the owners that they should give a news, put the land on the market. And as you can see, ZEIs were not at the same areas that the underutilized areas that were noticed by the city law to be on use. What I'm trying to say, and for you to understand more, is that we have many ZEIs at the central area, but they are not at the same place of other instruments that put pressures for the landowners to they offer the land to the market to build affordable housing. So we have two instruments that were thought to be together. We pressure landowners to put their land to produce affordable housing, and we use the money of the city to buy this land. This idea was completely mixed during the implementation of the plan, because the owners that were notified to put the land on use were not at the ZEIS area where we should buy the land. So this is a kind, that's important to understand how the narrative can use urban instruments and completely disconnected. We have many kinds of ZEIs, and I put this slide, I'm sorry, it's in Portuguese, I couldn't translate everything, but just to say that ZEIs 3, or what we call special social interest zones 3, that were the yellow ones of the map, the yellow ones here at the central area. The idea was that they were zones over underutilized vacant land. So the idea was to have a special zoning looking for these products. And what happens at the same time? We create another instrument that also was in our federal law, Estatuto da Cidade. That is the instrument that should, based on the idea of social function of the city and property, that our legislation on 80s, our constitution brought this idea that property and city should fulfill its social functions when it answers to collective interests, to public not only, but collective interests. The idea is that the owner of a land, he cannot do whatever he wants. He has to do things that the zoning is saying that he should do, but also what our master plans should say that the owner has to do to make collective interests in some areas of the city. This idea was very it's important for us to question this idea. We should, a property can fulfill its social function when it's collective occupied in a squat building, for instance. And that's what the lawsuits in Brazil and in São Paulo wrote it down. So even if it's precarious, we are using it when it's occupied by social movements in squat buildings. So what is about to how can we make city and property fulfill its social function? That should be a question that we should do for us when we do a plan for the central area or a housing plan. But what happened is that the history of our urban instruments designed a special instrument to fulfill its social function. So we associate this idea with an instrument. That's, for me, that's one huge mistake. We should have associated with collective plans, a counter hegemonic plans, and other ways of living. All of it could be read for us into our master plans as property fulfilling its social function. So that's one important thing to start this narrative. But I will show you how this instrument was used to be the instrument that should pressure the owner of land to compulsory subdivide or construct or use their land. And this was the first instrument that was created, what we call PEUC. I will talk a lot about PEUC because compulsory subdivision, construction, and use of land, it's hard to put in a single word. But PEUC means that's the first trio, what we call trio of instruments that the city makes a notification for the landowner, the landowner, and says you have 1 year to subdivide, construct, or use your property. And then time passes through and comes the second instrument after 1 year is that we can use the second instrument is the progressive property taxation. I don't know how to say that, pronounces that, the progressive property taxation over the time. It's the land taxes that we pay for being in the urban area that should grow progressively until it reaches 15% of the land value. So the idea is to be strong, to pressure landowners by paying a lot to maintain it underused, and they give up and give unused, construct, or subdivide the land. So this is the second instrument, and it goes for 5 years. And then if the landowner didn't give unused or constructed or subdivide, he can be expropriated, and he could be expropriated with a special kind of payment that is through securitized public debt that are paid while the public debt is launched in the market. So it takes a long time to receive the money for the expropriation. So it's not good to be expropriated by these instruments. But we have many law problems, and how the city cannot make public debt higher than that. We are negotiating how to change this federal law. And also we have many urban proposals now trying to overcome the fact that these instruments, the third one, should never be used, because São Paulo City cannot make public debt bigger, so it cannot expropriate with public debt payments. And these three instruments, they were designed on the first São Paulo Master Plan at 2002, and very much designed and planned and studied, and also started to be developed with the city government after the São Paulo Master Plan of 2014. And here I have some data. I should go, how can I go out? Are you there? Just say you're alive.
Yes.
We're all there.
And
Yes.
Yes, you.
the notified properties in São Paulo, we notified around 1,300 properties, and many of them of unused land, as you can see from the information that are above. Some of them underdeveloped, some of them underutilized. These were three categories that we create to notify the landowner. At the central area, almost half of that are the central areas, are these central districts that I'm showing all of the time. More or less 600 properties were notified, and as it has a process, so the owner is notified, he can appeal, and then he's not notified anymore. He justifies, he says, oh, I'm trying to sell the properties, I have to to make changes on that, to put on the market. He can, oh, I have already approved the project, and that's why it's not used. So he can argue, and then some properties are off, and then it goes, some are notified, and after 1 year, almost 500 didn't occupy the properties and started to receive this progressive tax in IPTU, land taxes, over 200 properties, more or less. None of them were expropriated. And what we are saying is that they are not putting land on the market. Almost 5 could not be noticed by the city, and 25 occupied the property. Oh, 91 occupied the property or approved a project. So we investigated. Fabio Costa, a master's student, investigated that, and we tried to see these 91 that have occupied or have accomplished it with the idea of function of property, considering the first instrument, PILC. They approved project, they were considered okay, and some of them occupied the property, but with producing housing units or with commercial sites or all of these things. So we went deeper on that, and I will not stay more half an hour talking about that. So I put one slide of some conclusions. First of all, another investigation of LabCidade, that's another lab from FAUUSP, investigated and noticed that some property owners of the central area of São Paulo were owners of parking lots. So many parking lots were notified by São Paulo City as underused, and that should have an unused or built on that building. And LabCidade was looking for the properties, and also I'm looking forward to a PhD of Ana Gabriela Caishi. She's studying that, the property, who were the owners of these properties. And she saw that many of them were parking lots, but they were owned by real estate market companies. So the parking lot was waiting for land evaluation, land prices evolution, and to build a new housing project. So we have doubts if the instruments not only recognize a process that was ongoing, that it was to produce new housing units, because these were not necessarily urban properties that were into ZEIS. So they were not for affordable housing. And we saw many of them being transformed in advocacy offices and to commercial areas. So what is to accomplish a social function? How can we accomplish that? Is that all of this effort of urban instruments and public institution was to produce uses? Doesn't matter what use is that, or should it be interesting to put new housing on central area that was vacant? What was the intention? So this makes us bring us some questions about that. And we saw only 87 properties that are in ZEIS. So some properties are in special social interest zones, about 10 hectares or 10 quarters, or it is not too much. And the rules to construct there stimulate mixed usage. So only a part of this area goes to the people who really needs and who live in this area. So that's what we saw. So what I'm trying to say is that these instruments, they were not effective. Some properties were notified. It was very important to regulate and start management of innovative instruments. It has a pedagogical, very important character, but almost 60% of them presented projects, but many of them have already projects when they were notified, so it was not effective. And by March 2019, we saw a housing unit production approved as a project, not constructed, approved. 800 units, more or less, for rents, income, family rent, between 1 minimum salary and 6 minimum salary. And so it could be for medium income classes, comparing to international categorizations, and more units approved as what we call popular market housing, that were for families between 6 and 10 minimal salaries. For you to have an idea, I could be a person that owns this affordable housing. I am a university professor that has a good medium income rent. So the urbanist effects were not very evident, but of course it was very important to start to think about what should be important to property fulfill its social function. And then I will start the third X, and I'll try to make it faster. And at the same time that we have ZEIS and we have PELC at this area, and ZEIS apart from PELC areas, we have some urban new developments, new projects over the central area that try to, I will talk it very fast, but I will let you my presentation. That was São Paulo state housing PPPs. The idea was in some special quarters of São Paulo at the central area, inside ASEIs that were not notified by PEOC, was to produce a huge number of new housing units, not all of them at the central area. So this was a huge, was thought about to be in other places at the city. And this housing PPP, every time that the housing PPP was launched, the urban area suffered violent pollution operations. We have one of them, the city started to destroy a squat building with people inside. And it was a tragedy. And you can see the destruction. There are pictures on the media, and then this main idea was associated with housing PPPs, but truly it was before to give land to the housing PPP. These people were being threatened and evicted in violent processes in an area at São Paulo that's very stigmatized by the media, by these ideas of tragedy and crime and insecurity, and also drug addiction. So this stigma justified a bigger program to produce a massive urban and massive housing units through São Paulo housing PPP. Now we have two PPPs, São Paulo state PPP, that is this one that I'm telling you, and São Paulo municipality PPP, one nearby the other. And this PPP started on 2014. So at the same time that we were doing master plan and we were discussing ZEIS and we were discussing how to change the territory through making popular plans of these zones, of the ZEIS, through who lives in this area, we were doing a urban policy to destruct. So the idea was to destroy some quarters and to build new units, and then people who live there started to be threatened and evicted. This eviction was a hard process, a violent one and a hard one, and it still is ongoing. And in 2018, some families were evicted from one block, the 36 block, and some families were threatened. During the pandemic, two blocks were demolished and people were evicted and received a temporary rent to stay around, because can you imagine to be evicted in the central area without working, in a precarious condition of work? And so they are on the central area, around central area. And until 2019, 1,000 units were delivered, not enough for those who were evicted. And many of them that were evicted could not pay for the mortgage and taxes, so they were not chosen to receive these units. So this is a contradiction. The policy was to do housing on central area over vacant land, but they destroyed occupied land, evicted and threatened people. And so for us, the idea of this PPP was to change, let me end it, otherwise I will talk a lot. But the idea was to change completely the land, so to evict and destroy 3 4 blocks sometimes, as you can see in this map. I will show you. They were doing this map that is just in my head, shows the blocks that they destroyed to build these new housing units. So they evicted more, or they threatened more than they relocate in this area. But the state is paying a lot, is paying for, is putting land. So this state and municipality expropriate the area, paying a lot, not with the social instruments, but with the traditional one, paying a lot for the owners. And they gave the land for the housing PPP. They paid for the construction of the units, so they pay for the units for the PPP, and they also pay for the services that to maintain for 20 years the new housing units. So government is putting land, is putting rights to build, because if they build for these two kinds of housing, they don't pay, or they pay less for rights to build. And they put resources, paying the construction, paying the new units, and paying also the services for maintaining the area for 20 years. And this is, for us, a urban renewal project that is translated into some ideas of displacement and emplacement around. So here is our displacement maps that shows that people that were evicted from one block of this housing PPP, where they are, where they were changing and leaving a part of the central area. So it was also a tentative to change population. And at the same time, just not to end into a terrible example, the people who resisted into another block, 2 blocks of this PPP, made a very interesting popular plan, participative, trying to say for the government, it's possible to do new units while maintaining us in this area without evicting. So what we call key to key. You destroy one place and add the block, construct the building, and then move population for the building, and then destroy the other, and also maintain historical places. You don't have to destroy completely, and in an urban renewal that erase the urban fabric. And this is something that if you should know, I invite you to see that. But they made a lot of demonstrations, and they here are some demonstrations fighting for having social housing in the central area. And I will end with that good and beautiful pictures. And if you want to see more, I separate some English versions of these ideas. And I will let you with this last slide. Thank you. I'm sorry for talking a lot. And if you're gonna see the video, you can put in the highest velocity. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Very nice.
Yes, perfect.
Paula, thank you very much. If I may just make one quick comment before we open to questions. I'd like to call attention from students to what you say today. We invited you because of the importance of understanding this discussion that you bring. So the instruments that you have spoken about, but foremost the narratives that intertwine this relationship of the instruments, the plan, the economic interest, are the very key for our students to unveil what's going on the ground. So they're right now making what we call the spatial analysis. So we can't really call it field work because we have the difficulty of the pandemic and in these difficult times, but This helps us understand why does this urban space look and operate as EU students are finding it on the ground. So in that perspective of the works of spatial analysis you are carrying out and developing at this point, I'd like to open for questions. It has been very, very, very interesting and nice to listen to you. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now I see we do not have questions on the chat, but I would like to open for my colleagues if they want to make any comments, and then for anyone who would have questions.
Yeah, I want to make a comment. So thank you so much, Paula, for taking the time to explain the intricacies of a zoning. And I would just like to give a little bit of background for you to understand where we what was our starting point. And of course the idea of this studio was from our perspective at TU Delft. So our students to design a collective housing project that is not only a one-off strategy, but a strategy that could be replicable. This is more or less the modus operandi. I think Nelson can present it later on, so that they are not really designing for one, they can think of a system that could be, try to be replicated, but of course, somehow not alien to a specific context, and especially the challenges from an urban perspective. So of course, for me, coming from São Paulo, and I thought that the ZEIS would be a very good starting point. And I wanted the students to understand, on the one hand, that zoning is not something that should be taken for granted, and it is the outcome of urban social movements that working together with scholars, with activists, with social scientists. This is a huge societal pressure and a conquest. But on the other hand, we should not only also take the zoning for granted as being capable of reversing a specific and systemic way the city developed. And this is not going to solve, it's not a miraculous solution to the city, but it's a very important one for them to understand. And I think they have we chose Barra Funda because we thought that it would be very interesting to understand this concept of the urban void as a disputed territory, not only because it encapsulates an idea of not only social justice, but also environmental justice. A city that grows anarchically and has so many built, a built environment with empty plots, with underused buildings. And of course, we mentioned the occupations to the students. So the idea, of course, since they are to build a project from scratch, we did not propose to operate in an occupation, in a squat, but we wanted them to understand that this is the kind of way that, so the ZEIS are one outcome of that movement, but the occupations are other ways of intervening and putting pressure, because they have the right to live in the city as well and have access to infrastructure, transportation, and so on. So for your presentation was extremely helpful for them to understand what are the challenges of the ZEIS, because when we see that the limited sector of the city, it's very hard to understand how exactly to operate within this logic of the urban void, which is the kind of premise of the ZEIS 3. And in Barra Funda is a case in point, because there are so many large warehouses, and we know what's happening in Barra Funda, how that neighborhood, for its location, it's changing so quickly. So we're inviting them to reflect on that. And of course, if we could go on site and have more time, the idea would also be to investigate who lives there, because this is a crucial point that you are actually making in your presentation, to understand that the ZEIS per se, if it does not really guarantee that the people who already managed to live in the city remain in place, then we are, it actually completely derails from its original purpose. So I think it's great. And on the other hand, the case you made about the tabula rasa of PPP or of the urban renewal is also something that we're really insisting with our students, trying to show that an area like that, which is so central, but is a former industrial area, also carries some, encapsulates a collective memory of São Paulo. So how really to understand that? And I think you showed, even for myself, knowing for sure better than our students how these things happen, it's very difficult to understand how a ZEIS is delimited. And I know there is a part of the ZEIS is also conselho, a council, so it should be run democratically. That's the premise of the ZEIS, but doesn't really happen in reality. So for students, it's very interesting to understand how the owners are notified, you know, what happens. And of course, I mean, you presented very brilliantly, but it's very complex and it's very difficult for them. So what we're doing at this point for sure is trying to investigate the kind of life that it exists, you know, in that area, who lives there, who works there, but it's also very curious to understand why some plots were included in the ZEIS, other not. Some parts are very consolidated, others are perishing, others are empty. So it's really difficult to seize and make sense of that if we are to propose a new housing project. And also to understand that ZEIS are really not meant to become ghettos in the city, but actually guarantee that lower income groups can have access to it. And I think also you made the very crucial point that you know, the kind of the poorest of the poor, sometimes they have no fixed income, so they really cannot really participate in this program. So it's really, really challenging. So of course this studio is very fast, but and we won't you know, manage to kind of address all those issues, but it's an initiation. It's also for us a testing ground for future design studios and future collaborations as well. And from São Paulo, of course, they will develop these ideas of the social function of the property, the right to the city, more thoroughly and theoretically. But I have to thank you for this presentation, because these are very, very complex topics, and you managed to unpack them for us in a very didactic way. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Vanessa, for your comments. And I think I can talk a little more about some things that you mentioned for you to know the history. ZEIS were designed in the master plan on 2002, very much inspired from urban social movements that wanted to change the squatted buildings that were an instrument of fight for right to the housing. And what happens is that during the time, how do they design that? That's what Vanessa was talking. And I was part of SE and MOCA master plans. We had regional master plans, and we inspired the perimeters through two ideas: opportunity of vacant land, side by side occupied places where we should have a housing policy response. So this idea was very much discussed on Marta government, for those who are Brazilian. And this idea was, and this was designed by housing policy that was translated to the master plan. So that's why these perimeters, and they are old because they were maintained since 2002. So, but we have 20 years on that. So everything changed. The central area changed. That's why I started showing you that. So we should question these perimeters. Yeah. But they are good because in our master plan, we have two obligations. For you to develop a ZEIS area, you have to do a plan. This is something that is on the law, on the city law, on the master plan, saying you have to develop a plan. So PPP, housing PPP, at first, when it was conceived, it was to develop these areas. It was to be combined with ZEIS, but then it changed around the life of the housing PPP and implementation. But the main idea was to do small projects of housing distributed into central areas and using some land, not destroying everything. So the idea was not to destroy, and then it changed. The idea was to combine instrument, and it changed. That's why I'm trying to explain to you. The ideas were good. And the second thing that our legislation says is that you have to do a plan of ZEIS, a ZEIS plan, and you have to have a council. And so this plan has to be approved by a council that involves people who lives in the area, that puts governments in an obligation to call people that live and organize it into a council, and they don't do that.
Yep.
And they don't do now because they have to do housing PPP model, and they put people together. They will say, no, we need a drug dealer, a drug addiction housing, combined with health equipments, combined with people who doesn't have money to pay a completely subsidized housing. And this thing cannot be discussed in a PPP. So the model, the contractual model of the PPP imposes one way, and the councils, they are being informed to discuss the eviction. Who is going to be evicted? Who can afford the house? To know the rent of the family, to understand if they, so they use it as a negotiation of temporary rent, and how and when the people that were evicted will be attended. So the question should be the opposite. They should be part of the plan.
Yeah.
And that's why Campos Elíseos plan is very important, because what did they do? They organized themselves. They were not the social movements that we know,
yeah,
the big ones from Brazil, from São Paulo. No, there were people who lived in block 36 of central area of Campos Elíseos.
Yeah.
So they have to organize them. It takes time, it takes energy. And what I suggest you to see this plan, because they recognizing the needs, the way that the plan is constructed, and also the form, the urban form, has everything to do with the needs. So they combined health equipment, social equipments, with drug addiction places to live, with housing for medium income, for low income, destruction with maintenance of a church that was there, of a historical building that was there, and also with a lot of poetry. As you can see, they visited, unfortunately, we cannot do that now in pandemic, but they visited the areas, the ways of living, and talked with people. And they brought, for instance, windows, these ideas of buildings that are windows that mix light into the forms, was brought from the discussion of people that lived in tenements. And they were saying, oh, when we open a window, change it completely, the darkness of the place. So there's a lot of poetry on that, on this process. It's completely different from the logic of doing massive urban and housing policies. And the last thing that I would like to say is that we are discussing the review of master plan, and we are discussing an urban plan for the central area at São Paulo that I didn't talk, because it's too much ideas. I thought that we should focus on 3.1. And this plan for the central area, we thought it should be planned. It should be a plan of ZEIS, a plan for ZEIS. If you do that, this work would be very interesting for São Paulo, because to think
I'm sorry, we don't hear you. I think you are muted. Could you please open your sound? Thank you.
What did you hear?
We just we missed the last 30 seconds.
No, you said it would be great if you could, and then
if you could start from the ground, start from the ZEIS, and think a plan of ZEIS, of one ZEIS, but what could be a plan of ZEIS? Like things that should be replicable for other ZEIS areas at the Central area should be very nice. And we thought that's how government should start a plan for the Central area. But what happens is that it comes completely on opposite. It comes with the opportunity of money that we have and a structure to stimulate real estate market, not a structure to understand this popular territory and transform it from above, from them, from the ZEIS areas. I think that's it.
Just one final question in relation to what you said about the councils. They are formed spontaneously, or the councils of each of the ZEIS. So the ZEIS, we are working on the ZEIS 3C009. And we have trouble to understand, is there a council of that ZEIS? Or, you know, so how are they only constituted?
Very good question, Vanessa, very good. Because we thought at the first master plan, 2002, ZEIS were a perimeter that has many blocks inside, that had many blocks inside. Now, for map representation, each ZEIS is one block. So you are at 36, I don't know, number, sure, express. We work with block 36, 37, 38, that were the PPP blocks that were demolished. That's what we are monitoring. But, and then it's obvious when you see they didn't thought about what was if the councillors should be part of the highest, the bigger perimeter, or should be each block divided by each block. So the first discussion into the demolition of block 36 was how should be a ZEIS council? And the government doesn't know. They didn't thought about that. They didn't think about that. So it's a sign that they were not worried on doing that. They were not worried. They didn't thought about. And then we started to discuss, and they said, okay, let's do one block, because if they do 3 blocks, there were many people against the project. So they fragmented. And for the other block, they put 2 blocks together. And then we said, come on, isn't that one block? And why this can't be a bigger one? And we always fighted for having the huge perimeter and not only think the perimeter. That's why I should say for you who are designing, don't think into an island, the perimeter as an island. It is not, it is part of the city. So the biggest you think and multi-scalar way you think it should be better. You have train passing through. You have metropolitan areas and uses that are in this area that are important. We have patrimonial
heritage
size, many of them. So think bigger, bigger. Don't think in what the law is designing you, think bigger. And that's what I mean by that. We fight it to have a council in each block, and each council is different from other. Although we have a regulation, it's not written how it should be. And I have an article, a paper about that. I forgot to put. I will send you some instruments.
We have an essay by you in our bibliography, but I think it's very important for us to understand that in the law, there is a clause that says that ZEIS should have a council, so it should be run democratically, but in theory, but in practice, there is no description of how this council should be constituted, run, represented, and so on. So this is something very important to keep in mind and understand. Well,
there is a regulation, a city regulation that says that there is a minimum number of councillors. It cannot be less than 4.
Okay.
And it has to be half government, half society, civil society. Yeah. And that's strange because sometimes real estate market goes to civil society group and tries to be represented. So we are always losing. That's a council to lose. We make jokes about that. We are part, our lab is, we have a counselor in 30C block, and we go there for losing. We're losers. We're loser, but we are in the discussion.
Well, thank you so much.
Just Nelson, would you like to continue?
Yeah, I don't know if we still have.
Go ahead. We have 5 minutes, please.
Okay, so it's actually, well, first, of course, thank you very much, Paula. This was really insightful, and we learned a lot about housing policy, but also as part of a much bigger, issue, which is the issue of social justice and special justice. And so, actually, considering the social organization of the demand that you were talking about, and the PPPs. Recently, or over the last 5 years, we have also been working in Mumbai, where they have developed a particular program with PPPs, which resulted in I would say, tragic outcomes. So, and the dealing was, to a certain extent, there are some things that were similar to ZEIS. So I'm bringing this to the fore to check to what extent are you trying to control such detrimental cases as the ones that I'm going to describe very quickly. And the thing is all about ownership. Now, what happened in Mumbai was the following. So the government invited the private investors, so real estate developers, to move into slums that occupied prime real estate, meaning in areas which, of course, were highly desirable. And the deal was the following. If the developers would convince 70% of the slum dwellers to give them the land, and they will redevelop that area and give them houses for free. And then they would be able to, of course, on that land, to compensate for the expenses with, let's say, with the accommodation of the slum dwellers, to build, of course, commercial developments. Now, the thing that got wrong is that they never defined how much can you, how are these things going to be balanced? Because indeed, they built the houses for the slum dwellers, but nobody said how. So now the thing is that in 20% of the area, they built huge slabs where people barely have light and ventilation. So they are dying. Diseases like tuberculosis are spreading at fast pace. Whereas in the remaining 80%, they build flashy skyscrapers that they sell for an incredible amount of money. In the end, the profit that they make is pornographic. Now, the question is, in this case, there was no eviction. So, they prevented evictions because people actually live on the places where they were there. And the issue at the end is really about the special conditions in which people were accommodated. And of course, there were also micro instruments for exclusion and so on and so forth, which are not negligible. And in the end, it's also about, ownership, because they give these houses for free. So people actually own them. And for them, this was an asset. But now they are struggling to maintain those houses because they moved from, slums, ground bounded, to the 15th floor. They don't know how to maintain. They don't know how to pay the monthly fees for elevators. So how do you think that the ZEIS are preventing these issues?
This is not, Nelson. You described everything that happens here. The discussion about density of the building and how will they maintain. That's justified PPP, where the private came to guarantee the maintenance of the housing. But truly, I will comment 3 things quickly. It has everything to do with property rights. I agree with you. And we will discuss social function of this property when we discuss collective property. And collective property should not divide these territories that you described. One dense, occupied with less good urban conditions, and the other that is for rent and abusive profit. And we should not divide. I mean, I think we should discuss models like community land trusts and truly community land trust, not in the way of building it or designing or implementing it, but also in the question of property. And couldn't we thought about not only public housing, but public urban project, public urban project. Everything is public or collective. If the public doesn't have money, why not? We go on together, we put our properties and we share property in different ways and with different meanings. I mean, I think that you were at the point. The second comment is that it's always the same history. The areas are the new frontier of the real estate. So that's why we are talking about the central area at São Paulo. That's why I started showing that this central area is now a real estate place where there are new units and people, and so things are changing. The market is interested on that and has to change the urban law to put their model on that. And that's the same thing that you described. Okay, the high-rise buildings are what we want to do, so we will solve the slum question. And that's why they could not be more of the same, as I said, that maintains terrible aspects of the occupation. It's not for that, Zeis, but it has been used as that. And so the instrument is not neutral. It is, there are actors, social actors that are moving these instruments. And we have to pay attention because people just discovered that they are in an apartment that they cannot pay tax, and it's not for the size of their family. And there is a women question for me, very important. They are a kind of tired with the debt of paying. I have this debt I have to pay, and then I have to work, and then I have to take care of the kids, and that makes life terrible. I mean, and this is a housing design of a policies through highly desirable areas for the market. They want to have profits of that. And the other question is, okay, but Paula, how can we do urban transformation without urban public resources and without market? Because we were doing, constructing housing policies, thinking about a state that doesn't exist anymore. And we here in São Paulo, we didn't have the welfare state. We didn't have. So for us, it's a dream, something. And so how can we do that? That's why some urban and social movements are trying to design what they call PP-POP. It's a public-popular partnership. Why don't we think about something that we could do together and for them and with them construction? That can be one model. Of course, producing new units, it's important, but why does it has to be part of erasure of urban fabric and also eviction and also we can complain about erasing the urban fabric and eviction, but what we will put on place? That's what you're asking me. It cannot be more of the same and maintaining precarious life, but with titles and with debt, because family are paying for that. Or if they they won in Mumbai, great, but they cannot, they sometimes here in Brazil, when we do a public policies and we gave the house, we say, you cannot move, you cannot move. You have to be there because we bought it for you. And sometimes they sell and it comes into the market, and then all of the good quality is gentrified in other and temporarily other ways. So I think you're very good example of Mumbai, because we have to think you have to think, to project, to design is to think the future. And we cannot reproduce. And sometimes foreigners, I think that's not your case. They came here and say, oh, how nice is our auto-constructed places, and let's reproduce that. And that's exactly what we don't want. But at the last point, that we will have to change also minds. We have to change the desire of owning a house. So talk about properties, talking about this desire, everyone wants to have a house. And we have a cultural construction of that, historical, since land, slavery was chosen by land, and land was an asset. So it was séculos atrás, many years ago. So how to destroy that, how to reconstruct, how to have an idea of housing as a service, as I can live here for a while and then I can change the place, and this idea of not owning, think of not an asset, but of function and use function. And these we are not changing, And if you go to social movements, they want to have their own individual houses. So this is something that we have to construct broader.
Yes, thanks a lot, Paula. I guess that that attachment to property, I share it with my own cultural background. The Portuguese are pretty much the same. Property is everything.
Well, I would say it's the Portuguese legacy in Brazil. It's not that it's the same.
I didn't want to use that to avoid any kind of neo-colonial.
Yeah, I'm joking, but it is. No, but in Brazil we say o sonho da casa própria. It's like yeah. I mean, it really entails a paradigm shift.
A popular expression. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's part of our culture to like dream of home ownership, and it entails a real paradigm shift to think of social rent or cooperatives or collectively owned land. So
the name of the program is quite telling, Minha casa, minha vida, my house, my life, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And funny enough, in Angola, there was a similar program that was called Minha casa, meu sonho, my house, my dream. So you see that there is some kind of resonances here.
There is, yeah. Perhaps the students have questions. I don't see the. Yeah.
We have to take a few minutes for the students. It's important for us. Any questions? No? Well, it's okay.
I have just one more question, perhaps, that it could be in the back of their minds, because many of them in Barra Funda, we see that there are many new condominiums. And you mentioned that, and of course, we try to, and of course, they are working in collaboration with their São Paulo peers. So to understand this kind of desire to, have access to a condominium, even, lower middle classes with amenities, sala gourmet, swimming pool, you know, a plinth that has a parking lot, completely detached from the street life of a neighborhood. And we have a lot of trouble to understand, but how come, you know, these condominiums are built in the ZEIS? And then you mentioned that some of those projects were already approved before the ZEIS were delimited, etc. And sometimes, I mean, we're trying to show, of course, because we're not trying to be in that delimitation, as you say, that island, to show that some of these even are Minha Casa Minha Vida, but they replicate this dream of having access to that those amenities, the paranoia with safety. So perhaps you can say something about those projects that are already taking place. You said that many of them were already approved, but some of them are very recent. So it is difficult to understand how they, they take shape in the midst of a ZEIS in Barra Funda or elsewhere.
Vanessa, I don't know if condominiums have the same meanings in English. I suppose that gateway communities is more closer.
Condos.
Condos, yeah. We refer to that in class, so I think the students understand that the condominium is is that kind of typology. Let's
gateway,
say.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a very good question, and I'm trying to find a picture very good from these housing PPP new units that they were blocked with a wall, with a green wall, and the streets are designed by the wall, and then they choose completely the way of using the streets, the way of living in central area. There is a place, as I said, where people passes through it. That's a commercial, very important area. I didn't talk a lot about that, but it has a commercial diversity, and that it is sometimes a commercial core of some economic agenda, like, how can I say that? Electronics. It has an electronic area. If your iPhone falls down, you go there. If your computer doesn't go well, you go there. I mean, it is very central, and this economic agenda there is very, very dynamic. It moves a lot of money. People come from other states to go to central area to buy clothes, to buy electronics. So it has a lot of dynamic, of street dynamic. So that's sometimes, can you imagine? And then you put a condo into that. What does it mean? It means that people doesn't want to pass through the street, because there were only people. You are with two walls around you, and at the same time, people that were chosen to live there, they are afraid to go out, because they are okay. Maybe they are protected inside, but then when they cross the wall, they are in this city without city life, without the eyes of the street, without street life, really. And then they don't want to live there. They are trying to give back the apartments. That's very crazy what's happening, because you do a huge policies, you need housing, you have a housing, and you don't want it anymore because you're afraid to live there. It's not only, I mean, the question that Vanessa brought is not only a question of the money, the public resources, the profits. It's a question of how do we want to live in these places. And people who used to live in central areas know that the streets are noisy, and it's part of it. It is part of being safe. You are around people. Not now at pandemia, unfortunately. But, and this model is also Campos Elíseos project, Vanessa, brought some passengers. You could cross. You don't need to go around the block. You can cross and you can go up, and you have two térreos. How can I say that?
Levels? levels,
Two
ground floor?
levels,
Ground floor.
two
Ground floor?
ground floors, two public ground floors. You can go into a building and another ground floor, and so you have to think out of head. And these condo ideas were imposed by the bank. That's important for you to know. The bank that control the mortgage of the housing PPPs determines that you cannot put a lot of density. So Nelson Mota, you could not do what you do in Mumbai here. You have to do condos. And these condos, they cannot have more than 200 units, because if you put more density, it's cost to maintain, and that they have a lot of rules to approve the mortgage. And again, the mortgage determines the policy, and also the urban design, because they divide everything into blocks, into condos in one block. And we reproduce the city of condos.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was what Vanessa was asking,
Yeah, yeah.
but I thought.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the good
Well,
conversation.
Thank you again, Paula.
Bye.
It was a very nice conversation and a very important lecture for us. Wow.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Paula.
Thank you so much, Paula. It was really, really,
We keep in
really, really
touch,
good.
please.
Yes.
Afterwards, invite
You
me
should
to
come.
see the projects.
Yeah, you
Perfect.
should come.
Sure.
You should come to
Sure.
our creeds. Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah.
Or at the middle, I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation, and keep safe at home.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Bye.